Hello again, it's Hal from Light with a quick video recap of last week's Monday Night Light live web seminar training. We discussed sharpening, primarily the two sharpening algorithms we most often use within Adobe Photoshop CS4, Unsharp Mask and Smart Sharpen. Before we look at the specific algorithms themselves as well as the dialog boxes, I'd like to talk about sharpening itself. Remember that we typically have three types of sharpening. The first of those is input sharpening, and we take care of that during our raw conversion process, either in Lightroom's Develop module on the Detail tab or using the Detail tab of Adobe Camera Raw 5.4, soon to be 5.5. We also have potentially some creative sharpening or sharpening for content that we can work during the middle of our process. We talked about some of that when we discussed high radius, low amount sharpening a couple weeks ago. We finally have output sharpening, and output sharpening is going to occur near the end of our workflow when we have appropriately sized an image for output. Our recommendation here at Light is that you maintain a master file, and then your subfiles are sized, sharpened, and sent to whatever output device you choose. Our discussion today will be primarily directed towards that of a printer. So the sharpening algorithms are not really going to make our image sharper, but they are going to create an optical illusion such that the viewer will perceive them as being sharper, a little bit more clarity or a little bit more in focus. The way the sharpening algorithms do this is by creating contrast. Whether it is tonal contrast or color contrast, it's all about changing the light levels or the type of light to enhance whatever contrast is in the image. Looking at an image such as the one we have here, we see that we have some color on gray as well as white and black on gray. Where there is strictly tone, that is neutrals, no color involved, all neutral, whites, blacks, grays, the Unsharp Mask and Smart Sharpen will enhance with additional neutrals. Where there is color, however, Unsharp Mask or Smart Sharpen is going to create additional color within the image to give us plussed up contrast. Let's look at that real quick by coming to I'll just use the USM or Unsharp Mask on the test file to show you exactly what it's doing. Well, I'm going to take this and over sharpen. But when I over sharpen, you can see exactly what it is that the program is doing. Where I have color, say for example blue, it takes the opposite of blue, which is yellow, and introduces yellow into the image to give me higher contrast. The same thing happens with every other color. Where I have strictly tones and neutrals, then additional tones or neutrals, the opposite of whatever we have, are input into the image to enhance the contrast. What we're looking at here are called halos and artifacts. Halos, you can kind of see that glowing area that's used to help define the new or enhance the lines of contrast. We also have the artifacts themselves, and that is the different tonality or color that is injected into the image. All of our sharpening algorithms are going to, at least the ones here in Photoshop, are going to give us halos and artifacts to create that optical illusion. So this is what is happening in our sharpening process. It typically demonstrates with all these halos and artifacts entered into the image. We don't really want to do this at the beginning of the process. I'm going to cancel out of this Unsharp Mask and actually close down this Sharpen demo to bring up a different image, and we're going to use this to quickly go over our method of sharpening, that is output sharpening. For the full description of this, you're going to have to take a look at the MNL DVD, which will be coming out in a couple of months, as well as, or potentially coming here to Light and taking any of our print courses or sharpening courses. To keep the process non-destructive, I'm going to first duplicate my background layer. There's multiple ways to do that, but I'll just drag it to the bottom of the Layers panel. I'm going to name the new layer Sharpen, and I'll initially start out with a Sharpen filter of Unsharp Mask. Now USM does a really nice job, and it is a simple dialog box. Of concern to us, we have three primary sliders: amount, radius, and threshold. The amount, we can consider the intensity of the sharpening algorithm. The radius, over how many pixels is that sharpening algorithm going to be applied. For threshold, that determines how choosy Photoshop is when it figures out where is there contrast in the image. We know these sharpening algorithms want to enhance contrast, so it has to have some criteria to find the contrast. With threshold at 0, any contrast in the image is sharpened. As we move this threshold slider up though, as we move the threshold slider up, we can limit where the sharpening is applied. In most cases, I leave my threshold at 0 because I use a detailed mask in conjunction with my sharpening. I like to start with the radius, and I set my radius based on detail in the image. If it's a high detail image, anywhere from 0.5 up to 1. If it's a low detail image, anywhere from roughly 2 to 3. If it's an image where I just don't know, then I go between 1 and 1.5 pixels. For this image here, it's relatively high radius, or pardon me, relatively high detail, so I'm going to leave the radius at 1 pixel. Next step for me is I zoom my image into roughly 50%. I think that gives me a good view to really see what the sharpening is going to do, and it's more representative of what I'm going to see in my final print. Once I have the radius at 1 and the amount at 50, I will take the amount up to about 300% and being in the process of seeing whether or not I have too much sharpening, not enough, or just the right amount. The process that I use is one of, I like to call the Goldilocks sharpening. And you know Goldilocks is always running around trying to find something that was just right. And that's what we're going to do here. We're looking at sharpening and trying to see, okay, is it sharpened just a little bit, or is it really coming off the screen at me? Or do I have to squint and kind of see, is this sharpening algorithm even working? The primary means to figure that out is by using the preview toggle. So hitting that preview button on and off, we'll see the sharpening such that there's no sharpening, and then it's going to pop into effect. That's what we want to use to judge our sharpening levels. If the sharpening is too much, and how do I know that? Well, one, when I click my preview on and off, it's really going to pop off the screen at me, and it's really noticeable. In addition to that, my image starts to have some type of illustrative feel as opposed to a picture. Also, it could look a little crunchy, or places that have super high detail or fine detail end up losing all saturation and are looking almost black and white in those fine details. Those are some good indicators that we have over sharpened the image. If when I'm toggling my preview I find that the image is over sharpened, I'm going to start decreasing my amount in roughly 50% or 25% increments and then toggling that preview button on and off again. What I'm looking for here is as I toggle the preview on and off, I want to be able to see the sharpening just pop into effect. If it really jumps off the screen to me, it's too much. If I have to squint and get close to see if it's happening, it's probably not enough. So I will get to the point where I find a sharpening level that seems to be just right for this image. For me, it's probably somewhere around 127 on the amount and 1 pixel. Those aren't magic numbers, remember. That's just something that works for this specific image. Why do we have to do this in every image? Because sharpening is dependent upon image content, image size, and our output media type. That is my basic workflow with Unsharp Mask. Set the radius first, put the amount too high, and then begin to bring it down, toggling the preview button on and off until we get to a level that's just right. And you consider that your basic sharpening level. We'll talk about what we do with that in just a moment. Well, I'll hit cancel to bring up our second dialog box, and that is Smart Sharpen. Now this dialog is just a little bit bigger, but it has some sliders that are going to be very common to what we saw previously. Things that we recommend here, first of all, making sure that basic radial button is checked, and then down in the remove dialog, we actually remove lens blur as opposed to Gaussian or motion. Make sure that the more accurate checkbox is checked. Now we're in a very similar position to where we were before, with amount controlling intensity and radius controlling the distance over which that sharpening intensity is applied. I use the exact same criteria for radius as we did before. For amount on Smart Sharpen, my initial cut is at 100%, and then I do the exact same process. Toggle the preview on and off, and try and determine what my sharpening levels are. Do I have to squint to see it? Or does the sharpening really pop off the screen at me? Does the image begin to look illustrative? Or does it look crunchy? Do I find that any place with fine detail I'm losing my saturation and it's all just black and white? All those indicators go into figuring out how are my sharpening levels. For me, I think this is just a little bit not enough, so I'll bump it up maybe to about 125 and toggle this on and off again. That's a little strong. Back it to 115, toggle the preview, and it looks good. Once I set this level and hit the OK, this is our basic level of sharpening. The basic level of sharpening applies to a specific image. Now if I want to apply additional sharpening based on the image size or media type, I would follow these general rules. For me, the smaller the image, when I'm printing something 13 by 19 or smaller, I'll generally add a little bit more, about an extra 5 to 10% on the amount. For an image that is going to be printed onto fine art media, I will typically add another 5 to 10% of the sharpening, such that the image on the screen will look slightly over sharpened, and that's going to help me out. So that is where we were when we finished up our Monday Night Light last week. Please join us tonight where we'll pick up from hitting the OK button on. Thanks a lot. Hope to see you guys online.